Hello, I'm taking on a challenge to beat every playable Nintendo-published game. The next game is Trio of the Galaxy. Now, I imagine most of you have never heard of this one. I know I certainly hadn't before starting this challenge. However, this one was completely published by Nintendo in Japan. So, why is this one so obscure? Why doesn't Nintendo ever talk about it anymore? Well, there's a couple of reasons for that. First off, when it comes to the game's obscurity in the West, a large part of it is simply the fact that it was a Japanese exclusive. In Japan, it was known as Ginga no Sannin, which roughly translates to Trio of the Galaxy. It's a pretty text-heavy RPG, which would have required a lot of effort to port to the NES. On that note, unfortunately, there wasn't a fan translation for this game, and it kind of caught me by surprise, so Suji, my translator, wasn't able to make a translation in time. Instead, we decided to try something a little different. There's a game facts guide that contains most of the main story moments, so Suji joined me for these streams and provided translations and story explanations whenever needed. You'll see him next to me for the first portion of the game, although we later decided to just keep him off camera. Anyway, going back to the game's obscurity, the main reason why Nintendo themselves never talk about this game anymore is that they don't actually own the IP. This game was actually a port/remake of a PC Enix game called the Earth Fighter Ryza, known as Chikyu Senshi Ryza in Japan. As far as I can tell, the word Ryza isn't a real word, and it is the in-game name for the mechs that the main characters pilot. The Game Facts Guide uses the English word Riser since this is possibly what the word Ryza was supposed to mean. The original game launched on PC systems in 1985, predating Enix's own Dragon Quest by about half a year. The Famicom port was programmed by Pax Sofnica and was fully published by Nintendo. Makoto Kuba, the original game's director, wasn't entirely sure why Nintendo even published it, as he said the decision happened behind closed doors. Kuba said that Enix was hard at work on Dragon Quest III, Evo, Search for Eden, and ActRaiser at the time, so he speculated that Enix might have just been too busy. He also wondered if Enix was worried that Trio of the Galaxy's small ROM size might have done damage to their brand, since they were known as developers of large-scale RPGs. The cover art for the Famicom port was done by the famous manga artist Go Nagai, the creator of Mazinger Z, a manga that pioneered the mecha genre. Now, I don't know if they just didn't communicate well with Go Nagai or something, but the characters on the cover actually look pretty different from their in-game counterparts. Their hair colors are wrong and their outfits are pretty different. Anyway, both the combination of Trio of the Galaxy being a Japanese exclusive and a game that Nintendo doesn't fully own the license to results in a title that gets little to no acknowledgement by Nintendo today. It's not even on Nintendo's own list of first-party Famicom titles similar to Kung Fu, although at least that one made its way to the West. I don't know if I can call this Nintendo's most obscure title, but it's certainly up there. Alright, with all of that out of the way, let's jump into my time with the game. After waiting a bit on the title screen, I saw the game's opening cutscene. It starts by explaining that the game takes place in the year 2300, and that humanity has abandoned war and become one single nation, the Human Federation. It was a time of freedom and prosperity. However, humanity's peace was interrupted by a sudden attack from a strange civilization from outer space called the Garumu. After explaining this, a shadowy figure appeared on the screen and he explained the story of the Garumu. The sun of the Garumu's home world lost its light and their home planet was no longer inhabitable. They have been searching for a replacement and finally found a suitable planet, Earth. I guess their plan was to destroy all of humanity so that they could have complete control over the planet. After this, I created a file and started the game. You named the main character in this one, so he doesn't have an official name. Then, the game opened with another cutscene. It started with the commander, Daiichi, explaining the current situation of Earth. He said that over 3.3 billion humans had been killed so far, and Jupiter had been completely wiped out. Apparently, humanity was able to erect a force field around Earth, but it would eventually fall. The Garumu had been attacking us with ships sent out by a Garumu aircraft carrier, and my mission was to destroy it. It then introduced my teammates. My main companion was a guy named Blue, who was very crass and cocky. We both piloted mechs called Risers, and my Riser had an AI called Mio. Mio basically served as a guide throughout the game. Wait, so is that the trio? The main character, Blue, and the AI? Well, no. Blue is indeed one of them, but we actually haven't seen the last main character yet. Anyway, Mio told me that there was a force field around the Garumu aircraft carrier too, and to destroy it, I had to defeat 3 Garumu enemy bases. What we are looking at here is basically the world map. The way this game does the overworld is kind of interesting. Basically, you are on a grid, and there are various destinations on the map. For example, we've got human-made satellites, planets, and Garumu enemy bases. When you select a location, it tells you how many hops are necessary to reach that destination from your current placement. I'm not exactly sure of all the details of what a hop actually is, but basically you travel quick distances in a short time, and you have to stop briefly between each jump. After a hop, you can choose to either keep jumping or change your destination. However, that's not all. With each jump, you have a chance to encounter Garumu enemies. It's sort of like a random encounter system, but instead of walking from location to location, you jump across a grid from location to location. I started off on Earth, and I decided to travel to the moon since it was close by and we heard a distress signal coming from it. It was 8 hops away, and after a few hops, I ran into my first enemy ship. It's not clear from the sprite alone, but often a single enemy actually represents a group of enemies. On the right, we can see how many enemies there are in the group, as well as how much HP they all have remaining. So, here, there are 4 enemies, each with 3 HP. For most attacks, the damage you deal gets distributed evenly across the enemies. For my first hit, I used my default attack, which was apparently a 2M Vulcan. It did 14 damage, which was split across the 4 ships as 2 hits of 4 and 2 hits of 3. This was thankfully enough to defeat them all in one hit, but that doesn't happen often. After defeating them, I got some experience, some uranium, which serves as the currency, and some missiles, but I was already full on missiles. Missiles are an alternate type of attack that are stronger, but you only have a limited amount, as represented by the EM number under each of the character stats on the left. After winning the battle, Blue gave a big thumbs up and had a huge grin on his face. Blue is super expressive in this game, and his shocked face in particular is pretty funny. Anyway, after this, I kept jumping and I ran into another enemy type. This time there were only 2 of them, but they had a bunch more HP. I decided to try out my missiles, and something kind of interesting about these is that you can choose how many of them you want to fire. You can shoot all 10 at once, but that uses up all of your missiles, so generally you want to try to find a sweet spot when using them. I used 2 missiles here and I whooped them. The enemies dropped a health refill item, but at the time I didn't even know what it was. It's a simple sprite that's supposed to represent an energy capsule of some kind, but I kind of just thought it looked like a bowl of soup. After this, I encountered a huge group of enemies, and I learned about the downside of attacks being distributed. It took 3 attacks to take them all out, even though it only took 1 attack when there were 4 of them. I finally got to use Blue here too. He's basically just a second character you can control in battle. After Blue's turn, the enemy attacked, and as you might be able to guess, the enemy will attack as many times as there are units left in the group, so whittling their numbers down is definitely important with large groups like this. After fighting through some more enemies, I reached the moon. When I landed there, it changed to a 2D perspective, and I finally got to see what the mechs looked like. On the surface, I found some androids, and they told me that there were survivors here on the moon for me to rescue. After that, I entered some kind of pathway to a cave. In here was the game's first dungeon. The dungeons in this game are basically just big mazes, and I think they were completely new to the Famicom version. I pretty quickly found another android, and he told me that in order to become a true soldier, I would need to obtain 4 hearts: love, friendship, courage, and strength. Huh? What on earth does that mean? Anyway, as I wandered around, I found these weird circle things that deal damage when you step on them. Ouch. I also found an item on the ground. All items in this game just look like glowing spheres until you reach them and pick them up. This one was just another life refill. Eventually, I found a few more androids. One of them simply told me that I can use uranium as a way to purchase more weapons, and another one told me that a better gun called the 4M Vulcan was at a place called Simpson. Finally, the last one told me that something called a booster was somewhere here on the moon. After wandering around for a bit, I found the booster they spoke of, which was apparently an item that let me make larger jumps on the world map. I also found some kind of capsule here that contained the survivors I heard from earlier, and Blue suggested we take them back to Earth. On the way there, I equipped that booster, and now I could jump 2 points instead of just 1. Nice, that's twice as fast. When I arrived at Earth, I dropped off the survivors, and I also found out that visiting Earth will restore all of your HP. After this, I decided to head to a nearby satellite. Along the way, we received a transmission from Earth. One of the survivors, named Remy, wanted to thank us personally. Apparently, she had lost her memories, although Blue was confident they'd come back with time. Anyway, there wasn't anything too special at this first satellite. Satellites serve as health refills, and I was able to purchase missiles and energy capsules here. I decided not to purchase either for now though, as I was full on missiles and I couldn't even afford the energy capsule. I also found a new option here too, and when I selected it, it showed me my password. That's right, there's no saving in this one, just these complex passwords that are in Japanese. Great. After this, I decided to head towards the first Garumu base and see how tough it was. The map called it Garumu Base 1, so it was clearly the first one I was supposed to go to. Along the way, I got my first level up, which increased my max HP. Eventually, I reached the base, and I wasn't even able to hit it at first. When you enter the battle mode against one of these, you have to first approach the base a bunch while getting attacked. Basically, you need to have enough health to even stand a chance against these things. It became pretty apparent to me quickly that I didn't have enough health, so I ran away. After barely making it back to the satellite, it was time to try something else. I decided to go to a planet this time, Venus, although it was a bit further away. I had to fight through a ton of enemies, but after another level up, I made it. On the surface, an android told me that the heart of friendship was in darkness, whatever that means. On the inside, I pretty quickly realized that there were some dark areas inside the dungeon, so maybe this was the darkness the android was talking about. Anyway, soon after I started exploring this place, I got another transmission from Earth. This time, Daiichi explained that a new soldier would start assisting us from Earth, Rimi. Apparently, she had ESP powers that she could use to assist us in battle no matter where we were. You might have already figured it out by now, but Rimi is the final person of the trio. So, how this mechanic works is that in battle, you can use a spell learned by Rimi instead of doing a standard attack. She has her own ESP number, and each move costs a certain amount of ESP. I guess her ESP powers are pretty strong, as she's able to assist you like this all the way from Earth. At the start, all I had was an attack spell and a healing spell, although she learned more moves as I increased my level. I tried that attacking spell just to see what it was like, and it did quite a bit of damage. Nice. I ended up spending a lot of missiles on Venus early on, so I just didn't feel quite ready for this place yet. I flew all the way back home just to refill. I'm skipping a lot, but just know that there were a ton of battles happening while I was flying around. Anyway, at this point, I had gotten a bunch more level ups, and since I now had Rimi, I decided to challenge Garumu Base 1 again. This time, I was able to fly close enough to start attacking it, and I decided to just give it everything I had. I unloaded all my missiles at the base, and I did it. The first Garumu base was destroyed. After this, I decided to return to Venus to explore it some more. I explored around a bunch without finding anything, although I eventually found a secret passageway in one of those dark spots. Unfortunately, back here was an android who asked for a passcode, and I had no idea what it was. Darn, I guess I went all the way back here for nothing. Next, I decided to head towards another satellite, which was called Simpson. This was the place that the android said had a better weapon. When I got there, I bought two 4M Falcons, one for each of the mechs, and they weren't cheap. However, these things do twice as much damage, so it was definitely worth it. The shop also had S missiles here, which were stronger than the E missiles I was using before. Now, something kind of annoying about these missiles is that each character can only hold one type of missile, so when I bought S missiles here for the main character, I had to just throw away the E missile I had before. After this, I decided to head to another planet, Mars. There weren't any androids on the surface this time, but inside the planet I quickly found a guy who told me that the heart of strength was in this shelter. This place was large and mazy, and I ran into all kinds of enemies. Again, I'm skipping a lot of battles here, but I do think there are some cool enemy designs in this game. They also have tons of different spells of their own, and they're tough enough that I couldn't really just spam standard attacks to get through the game. While wandering around, I found a bunch of S missiles that I planned on saving for the next Garumu base. I also found these walls that I could destroy easily. I think these might have been checks to make sure I bought the 4M Vulcan gun, but I'm not really sure. Man, this place just kept going, and I was starting to run out of resources. Deep inside, I also started running into new, harder enemies, and one of them took out Blue. Unfortunately, the moment either one of your characters run out of HP, you get a game over. Bummer. Hey, why does Suji look so happy that I lost? Anyway, getting a game over like this sends you back to Earth. Instead of returning to Mars, I decided to fly back to Venus because there was another breakable wall there I had missed. Behind this wall was a forced encounter, and it was a super hard enemy too. After defeating it, I found an android that told me that there was some scientist named Hiroki at a place called Argon that I should find. After another forced encounter back here, I found another booster. This one let me jump 3 spaces, but now there was a downside. Each jump would cost 1 HP. Yeesh, that's kind of rough. Behind this was another forced encounter, and I didn't have enough resources to beat it. However, I found out something here. Items respawn in dungeons each time you leave and re-enter. I had found an S-missile item spot on Venus, so to prepare for these nasty guys, I grinded up to full S-missiles and challenged them again. It cost a bunch of these missiles to beat them, but I finally did it. Behind him was one more android, and he told me that the Heart of Love was on the back side of the moon. Huh? There's more to the moon? Anyway, after this, I decided to grind up on S-missiles so that I could finally challenge the next Garumu base. I grinded up to a maximum and flew all the way to Garumu Base 2, which was located near Simpson. Immediately at the start of the battle, he did a move that disabled Rimi's ESP, which meant I didn't have access to her useful heal spell. Thankfully, I still had a bunch of healing items, which are pretty nice because using them doesn't cost a turn. Once I got close enough, I bombarded the base with S-missiles and it got destroyed. Second Garumu base down. Up next, I decided to just explore the trio of satellites up to the northeast to see if they had any good items in their shops. The first place was called Unique, and here was a scientist guy who was pessimistic about my chances of beating the Garumu. How encouraging. At the next satellite, called Pixel, was a shop that contained a new weapon called the Ion Beam. This was even stronger than the 4M Vulcan, so I bought 2 of them right away. The final station was called Argon, which was where the scientist named Hiroki supposedly lived. However, it was blocked by a force field. Mio explained that the scientist was trapped inside and that we had no way to rescue him currently. Since I destroyed the second Garumu base pretty easily, I decided to test my luck with Garumu Base 3 before exploring any more planets. This one was a bit more difficult, and I didn't have as many missiles either. I used a defense boosting spell against this guy, and thankfully I was strong enough to take him down. Third and final Garumu base destroyed. This should mean that the force field surrounding the Garumu aircraft carrier should be down now. However, before I challenged the aircraft carrier, I decided to see what was inside the other planets first. To start, I went to Uranus. Here, I found a guy who explained that the Garumu commander who locked Hiroki on Argon was apparently somewhere on Uranus. The dungeon here was pretty large, and it was split into 2 different sides separated by a surface section. Deep in here, I found a Garumu skin husk. Ew. It apparently doesn't even do anything. Behind it, though, was the Heart of Courage. I did it. I finally found one of the 4 hearts. This let me upgrade one of my characters to have the option to target only 3 enemies instead of targeting everyone. This may not seem like much, but it's actually pretty useful. It lets you do more damage to specific enemies whenever there is a group, letting you take out a few enemies quickly rather than spreading your attacks thin against everything all at once. In certain situations, this will result in you getting hit by less attacks overall. I decided to just give the upgrade to the main character since he typically went first. Anyway, I kept exploring, and I found a guy who said that Hiroki had an antimatter missile which would be required to defeat the Garumu aircraft carrier. Well, looks like I'm not ready to fight that thing after all. I also found another android who said that Hiroki was looking for a true soldier that possessed the 4 hearts. Ah, so that's what those hearts are for. I guess that's my next mission now. Eventually, I found the enemy commander I heard about before. For some reason, boss enemies just look like 6 item orbs on the map. However, when I decided to fight him, it turned out that he was super injured. His name was Padin, and he said that he was loyal to the Garumu and that I should just finish him off. However, that didn't feel right, so I made the choice to repair him first. This softened his heart, and he suddenly started to feel affection for humanity. For some reason though, this caused him to suddenly explode. What the heck happened to him? Anyway, he left behind some item that I picked up, although we couldn't make out what it was. There was another android behind him, and he told me the password to the gate all the way back at Venus. So I flew all the way back to Venus at the other side of the map and entered in the password. Back here was the Heart of Friendship, second heart acquired. This one let me upgrade someone with a one-way attack, which was similar to the other upgrade, but it would just target a single enemy instead. I gave this one to the main character again, since I assumed I would find a 2-way attack and a 4-way attack with the other hearts, and I wanted to give those to Blue. After this, I finally decided to go all the way back to Mars. If you remember, this dungeon was huge and had some super tough enemies deep inside of it. However, I was a lot stronger now, so I was able to go a lot deeper this time. I found another booster here, which let me travel 4 jumps at once, but at the cost of 2 HP each time. After some more exploring and a ton of tough battles, I finally reached the end of Mars and found the Heart of Strength. Third heart acquired. This one gave me a missile capacity upgrade, which bumped one character's maximum missile count up from 10 to 20. Wait a second, that means there might not be a 2-way and a 4-way. I guess I should have given that 1-way to Blue. Whoops. I guess I'll give Blue the missile upgrade to make up for it. Around this time, I got a useful spell called Warp, which let me leave dungeons in an instant. And when used in the overworld, it took me to the nearest satellite station. This was helpful for not only getting out of tricky situations, but also as a way to cut travel towards stations in half. I used it to get back to Argon quicker to see if that item I got from Padin would do anything here. The item removed the force field surrounding Argon, and I finally met Hiroki. However, as was alluded to by the androids, he didn't want to give me the antimatter missile until I found all of the hearts. Come on, the fate of humanity is at stake here. Anyway, I knew that the last heart was somewhere on the dark side of the moon, but I had no idea how to reach it, so I just went to Pluto first. Maybe I'll find a clue here. This place was pretty tough, and I even got another game over here. Deep inside was another guy who wanted a passcode, but I didn't have one. I guess it's time to find the dark side of the moon without a hint. This was actually kind of nasty. I explored all over the dungeon inside the moon, but I couldn't find anything. What you had to do was approach the moon on the world map from the back, and typically I just went straight from the Earth to the moon. Since you can't just freely explore around the map, I had to do some weird jumping around to different destinations to get the right angle on it. However, I eventually got it and entered the dark side of the moon. This was another mazy dungeon, and deep in here I found the Heart of Love. Final heart obtained. This one gave me another missile capacity upgrade, which I gave to the main character. For some reason, I also found another joke item, which was a straw doll of Blue, which he found to be pretty creepy. With all 4 hearts obtained, I flew back to Argon, and Hiroki told me that the antimatter missiles were on Pluto behind that locked door. He gave me the password, and I went back to Pluto. After entering in the password, it didn't take me long to find the Antimatter missile. I guess I'm finally ready to take on the Garumu aircraft carrier. Is this going to be the end? There's pretty much nothing left on the map after all. I stocked up on missiles and challenged the carrier to a fight. After approaching this one in a similar way to the bases, I unleashed the Antimatter missile and it blew up immediately. Wow, that was a pretty easy final boss. With that, my characters all celebrated and decided to head back to Earth. Blue even said that when we got back, he wanted to open up a flower shop with Remy. When we returned to Earth, we were hailed as the heroes of humanity. The Garumu threat had been destroyed and any remaining Garumu had scattered. We lowered the shield surrounding Earth and celebrated. At night, the main character headed off to the beach and gazed at the countless stars in the sky. Remy appeared by his side and expressed relief over restoring peace to humanity. She reached for the main character's hand and grasped it, although not too long after, Blue suddenly appeared out of nowhere too. Oblivious to what was unfolding before him, Blue suddenly proposed to Remy and told her his flower shop idea. What the heck is this random love triangle happening at the end of the game? Anyway, Remy was absolutely bewildered at the scenario unfolding, and before she could answer, we heard a sudden siren. The Garumu were back. That's right, this was all a fake-out ending. Apparently, a Stargate suddenly appeared and Garumu were flooding out of it. My mission was to go through the portal and invade the Garumu homeland now. Before we left, Remy gave me a charm pendant, and Blue professed his love for her once again. I headed out for the portal and immediately noticed all the enemies were harder now. Oh boy. Once I stepped through the portal, we immediately went to an asteroid and found a new alien race. Thankfully, these guys were peaceful, and they even thought we were Garumu at first. These aliens are called Pios, and most of them have been wiped out by the Garumu. They vowed to help us in whatever way they could. After this, I was taken to a new world map. This one was called the Garumu Airspace. It didn't seem quite as big as the last one though. I noticed a Garumu battleship near another Stargate, and it was named Battleship 1. This was basically like the star bases, but this time when I destroyed it, a black hole appeared out of nowhere. I tried a bunch of different options to escape, but nothing was working. Remy started to try to get us out of there using her ESP, but she was really struggling. She even started calling out the main character's name before finally getting us out of there using her powers. At the end, Blue realized that by calling out my name, Remy was interested in me and not him, and his dreams of opening up a flower shop with her were gone. However, he moved on and refocused on his mission to destroy the Garumu. After this, I flew to another asteroid that was called Database. Once I reached it, an AI made by the Pios said that if I brought it discs, it would translate them for me. Then, I flew to a place called Alpha that I thought was a planet, but it turned out to be this solar system's sun. Whoops. I guess there's only one place left, a planet called Uru. I found a bunch of Pios here, and they gave me some new info. While this was the Garumu airspace, there was apparently another location called the Dark Airspace where the enemy base was located. I guess I'm not even in the final area yet. Another guy told me that this planet was destroyed by a group of elite Garumu named the Garumu Great Four. Their names were Padin, Princess Madonna, Barao, and Gameringer. Oh boy, 4 new bosses I have to find and beat? I'm not even close to being done with this game, am I? Anyway, deeper in here, I learned that one of the Garumu Great Four, Padin, was at a place called Omega, and he had a disc that I could use at the database. I also found another booster here, as well as a shop where I could buy an upgraded weapon. After this, I left and went back to that Stargate that was behind the battleship. At first, I thought this would just take me back home, but it actually took me to the Dark Airspace. True to its name, I couldn't actually see much here, and all I found was a single planet. This turned out to be Omega, the place where I could supposedly find Padin. On the surface, I found a Pios that said that my radar wasn't working well here, which was why I could only see one planet. He said that I needed the Garumu radar to find more locations. Man, this dungeon was really tough. The enemies were a sizable step up in difficulty. I did something kind of stupid here. I pushed defend by mistake instead of selecting ESP, causing the main character to die. I haven't talked about it too much, but mistakes like this were actually pretty common for me due to me not understanding Japanese. Anyway, on my next attempt, I finally found him, Padin, the first of the Garumu Great Four. He disabled my ESP immediately, which wasn't a good sign. I also didn't realize that I had found Padin at first, and I entered the encounter with Blue at half health. I unloaded a barrage of S-missiles at him, but soon after, Padin took Blue out in a single hit. Yeesh, this guy does so much damage. I decided to grind for some levels and money so that I could enter the fight with 40 S-missiles. It took me some time, but I finally felt ready to challenge Padin again. Man, even after unloading 40 S-missiles on the guy, he was still hanging on. Even though I couldn't heal with ESP, thankfully I could still use healing items or else I would have been toast. It took a lot of resources, but finally I took him out. First of the Garumu Great Four defeated. He dropped a disc, which I promptly took to the database. Upon getting it translated, I got some new locations added to my radar in the Garumu airspace. Looks like there were some planets and a new asteroid called Amos. So far, the asteroids had sort of been like the satellites, so I decided to head to Amos first to see if there was a shop. When I finally got there, it turned out it wasn't a good place at all. Suddenly, a big brain-looking dude showed up. Apparently, this was Barao's hideout. I had accidentally stumbled on another one of the Garumu Great Four. I was not in any state to fight him at the time, so I decided to just run away. Instead, I made my way to one of the planets that was called Zangu. On the surface, I found a bunch more Pios guys, and they gave me clues. One of them told me that the best beam was on this planet, which was obviously something I wanted. Another one of them said that there were 3 wise Pioses in the shelter. Wow, sounds like there's some good stuff in here. However, the last Pios told me that I wouldn't be able to see anything in the dungeon without the infrared scope, and once I stepped inside, everything was pitch black. Darn, I guess I can't get the best beam yet. Instead, I headed towards the last planet I had discovered, the Buru. There were no Pioses on the surface here, so there was only one thing to do: explore the dungeon. It turned out all the hints were buried within the dungeon. I found one guy that told me that the infrared scope was somewhere here. I also found P missiles, which were a tier above S missiles. After wandering some more, I found another Pios who told me that Princess Madonna was in here too. Oh boy, another one of the Garumu Great Four. That's not all. Apparently, she's holding the Garumu radar, which was that item that will let me find more locations in the dark airspace. Looks like beating her is probably my next objective, huh? After tons and tons of wandering, I finally found her, Princess Madonna. I decided to heal up before the fight, but I did something incredibly stupid. I selected the spell to escape the dungeon by mistake. Man, playing a game like this in Japanese was rough. After prepping myself a bit with some more P missiles, I decided to challenge her for real. Unfortunately, after casting some buff spells, I messed up again. I accidentally selected the runaway option and left the fight. Ugh, what a waste of ESP. Okay, this time I'm not holding back. I unleashed 10 P missiles at Madonna and she went down just like that. Second to the Garumu Great Four defeated. Man, navigating the Japanese menus was the hardest part of this fight. She dropped the Garumu radar, which not only opened up a bunch of locations in the dark airspace, but also a planet all the way in the corner of the Garumu airspace. Unfortunately, I didn't find the infrared scope yet, as there was a breakable wall on this planet my beam wasn't strong enough to destroy. Anyway, with this new radar, I first headed to a planet called Ra in the dark airspace, and this place was just a peaceful planet with a handful of Pioses on it. Here, I learned that Battleship 2 was protecting the Garumu fortress with a force field, and that the final member of the Garumu Great Four, Gameringer, was on a planet called Po. There was also a guy here that healed me up, and I used him often since it was the only spot to heal in the dark airspace. Finally, there was someone that told me that there was a secret message on the Garumu disc I found earlier. When you examine the item, you get the message, "When love and light intersect, the six-legged demon will be destroyed." Huh? What does that mean? Anyway, I decided to head for another new planet called Emu. On the surface of this one was a guy that told me that the hyper beam was in this shelter. Is that what I need to get the infrared scope and then the best beam? Inside, I learned about something called the S-Shield, which had a cooling effect. Apparently, it was in the possession of one of the Garumu Great Four. I also learned that there was another one-way and another three-way somewhere in the game, which would be nice for upgrading Blue to the same level as the main character. As I began to explore deeper, I started to realize just how nasty this place was. There were dark spots where it was unclear whether they were walls or passable ground, painful tiles everywhere, and tons of new, brutal enemies. Deep in the dungeon, I found another booster, allowing me to make bigger jumps and a three-way upgrade for Blue. Unfortunately, before I could finish exploring, I got destroyed by a group of 9 tough enemies, sending me all the way back to the Pios asteroid. To make matters worse, after making the entire trek back, I immediately ran into another one of these fights and I got wiped out again. Yeesh, this place is nasty. Finally, on my third try, I made it to the end. Here, there was a guy selling hyper beams, but to my dismay, I wasn't even close to being able to afford them. Come on, after all that, I couldn't even afford the reward? Well, next I decided to grind up to max P missiles and take on the second Garumu battleship. It took about 30 P missiles, but I was able to take it out without too much of a struggle. After this, I decided I really wanted those hyper beams, so I started grinding for a ton of money. The enemies in the overworld had gotten pretty tough, and I think they all got upgraded after I defeated the battleship. After a long grinding session, I was finally ready to afford just a single hyper beam. At this point, it made sense to buy just one for now, since upgrading even one of my character's attacks would probably be worth it. Phew, as I suspected, this thing made a huge difference. It was so much stronger than my previous weapon. Before grinding for another hyper beam, I decided to go all the way up to the top right of the Garumu airspace to a planet called X Point. This place wasn't all that large, but it had a super nasty forced encounter. These guys had a ton of HP and they completely healed after each turn. Unfortunately, I just didn't have enough missiles to take them out quickly enough, so I retreated for now. I once again grinded for a while after this. I filled up on P missiles and got enough money for another hyper beam. Nice, now blue is stronger too. Before heading back to X Point, I finally decided to fight Barao again, the Garumu Grade 4 member on that asteroid. He was, super easy. I think I was supposed to beat him a lot sooner. With that, the third member of the Garumu Grade 4 was defeated. Beating him just unlocks a shop where you can buy P-missiles, which I guess was nice, but not really necessary since I often found them in space as enemy drops. I still bought a bunch here though and headed back to X Point. With enough missiles, I was able to defeat those nasty guys. They were guarding an item called the Prism, which healed me by 3 HP with each hop. Nice, that'll help offset the damage I was taking with each jump. Next, I finally went back to Iburu to get the infrared scope. With my new hyper beam, I was able to take out that wall from earlier, and behind it was the scope. At last, I can go to Zangu and get the best beam. In Zangu, I could finally see inside the dungeon, and I found some of those wise Pios guys that were mentioned earlier. They told me that something super important was hidden away on Alpha, the sun that was in the Garumu airspace, and I would need something from Gameringer, the final member of the Garumu Grade 4, to land on it. Anyway, there was also a bunch of useful items in here. I found another booster, a one-way upgrade for blue, and a shop that held the best beam. However, you'll notice that the best beam is actually cheaper than the hyper beam. It turns out the name best beam was a lie. The hyper beam is actually the best beam, and there was no reason to buy the best beam here at all. I don't know if the devs were just trolling or if it was some kind of mistake. The fact that it was cheaper than the hyper beam makes me think that it might have been intentional. Keep in mind, I had to get the hyper beam to get the infrared scope, which was necessary to find the best beam. Anyway, with that planet explored, there was only one place left, Po, the home of Gameringer. On this planet, I learned that the Emperor of the Garumu was called Wurai, but not much was known about him. I also learned that something called Icarus was on the Alpha Star. This planet had another sprawling dungeon, and at the end was the last member of the Garumu Grade 4, Gameringer. After spending 20 of my 40 P-missiles, I made a terrible mistake. I selected the runaway option again. Oh, come on. Well, maybe I still stood a chance, so I decided to fight him again. However, after spending the remaining 20 P-missiles, I selected the runaway option again. Oh, come on, I just wasted all 40 of my P-missiles on him. If you are wondering why this happened so much, it's because there are multiple different submenus, and I would sometimes get confused as to which submenu I was in. Anyway, I practically needed missiles to beat the boss, so with my tail between my legs, I escaped the planet and started grinding a bunch. After some time, I was ready to challenge him again, and this time I wasn't going to run away. Man, even 40 P-missiles wasn't actually enough to take this guy down. However, after some ESP attacks from Remy, I was finally able to defeat him. Phew, it was a bit painful, but with that, the last member of the Garumu Grade 4 was defeated. He dropped the S-shield, which let me land on Alpha, the star. Here, I found a super weapon called Icarus. This thing is a special item that essentially one-shots everything on screen, but you can only use it 8 times. I think the name and location of Icarus is a reference to the fact that Icarus, a figure from Greek mythology, flew too close to the sun. I was almost done with the game here, although I decided to grind to max level since I was actually pretty close to it. Then, at max level and with Icarus in hand, it was time to enter the final dungeon, the Garumu Fortress. This dungeon was terrible. Not only was it pretty large, but the enemies here were absolutely brutal. Those guys that could heal were here as normal enemies, as well as a terrible battle with 9 super tough enemies all at once. I often just ran away from battles, and I even used a few charges of Icarus here and there just to make it through. The worst part though was the final stretch of 3 required battles. Here, I was forced to fight a ton of those healing guys, including a final fight with 9 of them all at once. For these guys, not even Icarus was enough to take them all out at once. Honestly, I'm not even sure if this part would be beatable without Icarus. Remember, these guys heal fully after every complete turn. I'm not sure what you could even do if Icarus ran out of charges before this point. After them was one final room that contained the final boss. Some kind of 6-legged enemy that was called Garujaka, and there were 3 of them. Now, you might remember that I heard something about a 6-legged demon before. That's right, the message on the disc. It said, when love and light intersect, the 6-legged demon will be destroyed. This was a clue to use a late-game spell that Remy learned called Love. This spell normally didn't do anything, but here it reduced all of their HP down to critical. After this, it only took a few shots of the Hyper Beam to finish them off. Honestly, this was a pretty easy final boss once you solved the riddle. Wait, so does this mean you don't actually fight Wurai, the Emperor I heard about? Well, not really. Everything else was resolved in an ending cutscene, but get ready, it's a doozy. Emperor Wurai appeared with an evil laugh. He expressed that he was saddened by the loss of his greatest soldiers, but he praised my efforts. He even said that we would have made great Garumu soldiers, but it was never going to happen, so he decided to end our lives. Wurai could also use ESP, similar to Remy, and he blasted us with such a direct attack to our brains that both my character and Blue collapsed. However, suddenly, Remy told me to use the pendant, which could apparently counter ESP. When I held it up, Warai recognized the pendant. He claimed it belonged to his sister. Does that mean Remy is actually a Garumu? Well, if you remember, she had no memories at the start of the game. Unfortunately, Warai's ESP powers were still too strong, and he ripped the pendant from my hand. He then charged the pendant with a lethal dose of 1000p ESP power, meaning that touching it now would surely kill us. Remy said there was no other way to stop Warai without the pendant, so Blue decided to make one final bold move. Unwilling to hand over the planet he loved to the Garumu, Blue grabbed the pendant anyway and got blasted by its power. With the last of his strength, Blue tossed the pendant back to me, having absorbed the full brunt of the ESP power. Blue then gave one final message to me as he collapsed. I leave the rest to you. I go to my final rest. Be happy with Remy. Then a single message appeared on the screen. Blue died. With a newfound resolve, I held the pendant once more, and now Blue's dying wish had powered up the pendant somehow. Remy also added her own psychic power to the pendant as I prepared to send out a powerful attack to the Emperor. However, in a last-ditch effort, Warai revealed that Remy was indeed his younger sister. He urged her to remember how much his people suffered. This caused Remy's memories to return. Warai claimed that even if he died, the Garumu would seek out Remy so that she would inherit the throne. After those final words, the pendant released a brilliant light that brought the Emperor to his death. After this, the Garumu were finally defeated, but the main character wrestled with the realization that Remy was also Garumu. They both stood at the beach from earlier in the game and gazed into the night sky. Remy revealed that in order to prevent the Garumu from ever loving humans, they somehow created something called the Garumu Iron Law. If a Garumu was ever to love a human, they would become infected with a deadly virus. Now, if you remember, all the way near the beginning, we actually saw this virus in effect, when Padin started to love humanity but suddenly exploded. Remy said that it was too late for her, as she too had fallen in love with a human. If she were to keep living, a terrible virus would spring forth and destroy all of humanity. She said that until she died, the Garumu war would never truly end. So, in a feeble attempt to convince the player that she needed to die, she pointed her gun at the player and said that she was an enemy of Earth. She said that to protect Earth, the player would need to draw his own weapon. The player then pulled out his own gun, and the two said their last words. The player said, "I love you," and Remy responded with a simple, "Me too." The sound of the blaster echoed across the beach as the beam passed through Remy's chest. It turned out the safety of her own gun was turned on and she never intended to fire it. With that, the trio of the Galaxy was no more, as only one of the three survived. The game ended and the credits rolled. Trio of the Galaxy complete. On to the review. Wow, what a unique game that I never knew existed before this challenge. It's really interesting to play an RPG from Japan that was a bit more experimental, considering it was such an early attempt at a console RPG. The way you explored space by hopping around was pretty interesting, and the group-focused battles made me have to strategize in some kind of unique ways. One aspect I liked was the game's semi-non-linearity, as it allowed you to tackle multiple objectives in whatever order you wanted. There's a lot to discover, and the game does a pretty good job of capturing the spirit of exploring through space. That being said, traveling in this game did get super tedious at times. You just had to fight through so many battles as you travel from location to location. I don't generally mind a game forcing you to engage with its core battle system, but it just felt like such a chore to get from point A to B at times. Also, while I did enjoy the battle system enough, the balance was a bit all over the place. The game was full of sudden difficulty spikes, and even in a single dungeon, individual encounters would vary quite drastically in difficulty. This often resulted in luck playing a significant role as to when I would run out of resources. Another aspect that I thought was a bit weak were the visuals. I liked all the enemy designs, and some of the characters' expressions were fun, but other than that, it was pretty bland. A lot of the events were just explained without you really seeing anything, and the fact that the boss enemies just looked like a circle of item sprites felt kind of cheap too. The ending scene in particular really could have used a few more visuals to help it have a greater impact. Oh, and let's talk about that ending. Now, I don't necessarily mind a tragic ending, and I can appreciate what they were going for, but unfortunately it kinda came out of left field, and some of the sudden plot points felt a bit contrived. It kinda seemed like it took a dark turn because the writers just wanted it to, and not because that was the direction the story was heading. It was alright, and it was especially cinematic for the time, but it also felt a bit gratuitous. Overall, I did like the game, although it also had some issues that made certain parts of the game a bit of a slog to get through. It may not be my favorite RPG from this era, but it's certainly one I won't soon forget. I gave the game a 6 out of 10. With Trio of the Galaxy complete, I have now finished 62 out of the 150 NES games in the challenge, meaning I am now 41.33% of the way through all of the NES games. Thanks for watching the video. If you want to see more of these in the future, make sure you subscribe to the channel so that you won't miss out on the next one. Also leave a like if you enjoyed it, since it will help the channel grow and motivate me to continue this series. I hope I will see you in the next step of my quest to beat every Nintendo game.